The Texas sky had been threatening all afternoon, turning from its usual brilliant blue to an ominous slate gray that stretched endlessly across the horizon. Daniel Cooper gripped the steering wheel of his old Ford F-250 as the first fat raindrops splattered against the windshield, each one hitting with the force of a small pebble. He'd been in town dealing with the bank, another humiliating conversation about extensions and payment plans that led nowhere. And now he just wanted to get home to the ranch before the storm hit full force. The radio crackled with a severe weather warning for Bexar County and the surrounding areas. Daniel reached over and turned up the volume, listening as the meteorologist warned of flash flooding, hail, and winds up to 70 miles per hour. Nothing he hadn't weathered before. Growing up on a ranch 40 minutes outside San Antonio meant you learned to respect Mother Nature, but not fear her. At 42 years old, Daniel had seen his share of storms, both literal and metaphorical. The physical scars on his left shoulder and back, souvenirs from his 2 tours in Afghanistan, ached whenever the pressure dropped like this. But those old wounds were nothing compared to the fresh grief that still caught him off guard 6 months after burying his father, Robert Cooper, the man who'd taught him everything about ranching, honor, and what it meant to be a man of your word. The rain intensified suddenly, transforming from a steady patter into a torrential downpour that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Daniel slowed the truck to a crawl, leaning forward to peer through the windshield as the wipers worked frantically, barely keeping up with the deluge. The 2-lane highway stretched out before him, empty except for the occasional tumbleweed that skittered across the asphalt, propelled by wind that was growing stronger by the minute. Lightning split the darkening sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the truck's frame. Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd driven through worse, including sandstorms in Kandahar that could strip paint off a vehicle. But there was something particularly unsettling about these Texas storms. Maybe it was because out here, help was far away. Or maybe it was because he'd been feeling so alone lately, ever since his father's heart had given out while mending a fence on the north pasture. The ranch, the Cooper family ranch that had been in the family for 3 generations, was hemorrhaging money. Medical bills from his father's final months, compounded by 2 years of drought that had decimated their cattle operation, had pushed Daniel to the breaking point. The meeting at First National Bank this afternoon had been his last-ditch effort to negotiate a loan modification, and it had gone about as well as expected. The loan officer, a young guy named Bradford Hayes, who couldn't have been more than 30 and wore a suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly mortgage payment, had looked at him with what Daniel recognized as pity. "Mr. Cooper, I understand your situation is difficult," Bradford had said, his voice carrying that particular tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news they've rehearsed. "But the bank's position is clear. You're 4 months behind on payments, and we've already extended the deadline twice. Without a significant payment by January 15th, that's 5 weeks from now, we'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings. 5 weeks, 35 days to somehow come up with $43,000 or lose everything his grandfather had built, everything his father had sacrificed for, everything that gave Daniel's life meaning." The headlights caught something ahead, a dark shape on the side of the road that didn't belong. Daniel squinted through the rain and realized it was a vehicle, a luxury SUV that looked distinctly out of place on this rural stretch of highway. As he drew closer, he could see the hazard lights blinking weakly and a figure standing beside the driver's door getting absolutely drenched. Daniel's first instinct was to keep driving. He was exhausted, emotionally drained from the bank meeting, and eager to get home. But his father's voice echoed in his memory, as clear as if Robert Cooper were sitting in the passenger seat. "We help people, Daniel. That's what we do. Doesn't matter if it's convenient. Doesn't matter if we're tired. When someone needs help, we stop. With a sigh that came from somewhere deep in his chest, Daniel slowed the truck and pulled onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead of the stranded vehicle. He reached behind the seat for his rain jacket, a battered olive green military surplus item that had seen better days, and pulled it on before stepping out into the storm. The wind immediately tried to tear the door from his grasp, and the rain hit him like a wall of water. Daniel hunched his shoulders and jogged back to where the man stood beside the SUV. As he got closer, he could see it was an older gentleman, probably in his early 70s, wearing what had once been a nice button-down shirt and jeans, but were now plastered to his body by the rain. The man's white hair was matted to his head, and he looked thoroughly miserable, but was attempting to maintain some dignity despite the circumstances. "Need some help?" Daniel shouted over the howl of the wind. The man turned, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or relief. "I sure do appreciate it," he called back. "Got a flat tire, and when I tried to call for roadside assistance, my phone died. Been standing here about 20 minutes, hoping someone would come along." Daniel nodded and moved to examine the vehicle. The rear driver's side tire was completely shredded. Probably hit a piece of debris on the road. "You got a spare?" "Should be one in the back, but I'll be honest with you. I haven't changed a tire in about 30 years. The man gave a self-deprecating smile. "My skills are a bit rusty." "No problem. Let's get you out of this rain first." Daniel gestured toward his truck. "Go sit in my vehicle while I take care of this. Heater's running, keys are in it." The man hesitated, studying Daniel's face with an intensity that seemed odd given the circumstances. "You sure?" "Absolutely. No sense both of us drowning out here." Daniel was already moving to the back of the SUV, lifting the hatch to locate the spare tire and jack. "Thank you. Really." The man jogged toward Daniel's truck, and Daniel caught a glimpse of something familiar about him, something he couldn't quite place. But there wasn't time to think about it. The storm was intensifying, and he needed to work fast. The next 20 minutes were a study in misery. The jack kept slipping on the muddy shoulder, forcing Daniel to dig around in the truck bed for pieces of wood to provide a stable base. His hands, already scarred from years of ranch work and combat, became slick with rain and mud. The lug nuts were on so tight he had to use his full body weight on the wrench to loosen them. Lightning continued to strobe across the sky, turning the world into a series of frozen, black and white photographs. But Daniel had done harder things. He'd changed tires on Humvees while taking sporadic fire from insurgents. He'd mended miles of fence line in 100-degree heat. He'd sat beside his father's hospital bed for 3 days straight, holding the old man's hand as life slowly ebbed away. Changing a tire in the rain was uncomfortable, but it was manageable. Finally, he wrestled the spare onto the hub, tightened the lug nuts in a star pattern the way his father had taught him, and lowered the jack. The SUV settled onto its new tire with a slight bounce. Daniel packed the flat and the tools back into the vehicle's storage compartment and slammed the hatch shut. When he climbed into his truck, dripping water all over the floor mats, he found the man sitting in the passenger seat, hands held toward the heating vents. The interior light was on, and for the first time, Daniel got a clear look at his passenger's face. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. Those distinctive features, those eyes that had gazed out from album covers and concert posters for decades. This wasn't just some stranded motorist. This was George Strait, the king of country music himself, a living legend who'd sold over 100 million records worldwide. If the man noticed Daniel's sudden stillness, he didn't show it. Instead, he extended a hand. "George," he said simply, "I can't thank you enough for stopping. Thought I might be stuck out here all night." Daniel shook the offered hand, his brain struggling to catch up with the surreal situation. Daniel Cooper. And it's no trouble. Couldn't just drive past. Well, Daniel Cooper, you're a lifesaver. George gestured toward the windshield, where the rain continued to hammer down. Visibility's pretty bad. You know somewhere nearby where I could wait this out? Maybe get some coffee and try to call my manager? Daniel considered. The nearest town with any services was Castroville, about 15 miles back the way he'd come. In this weather, it would take at least 30 minutes, and the roads were only going to get worse. His ranch was just 10 minutes ahead, and he had coffee, a dry place to wait, and a phone charger. Look, I live just up the road, Daniel heard himself say. Nothing fancy, but it's dry, there's hot coffee, and you can use my phone to make your calls. Once this storm passes, I can help you get wherever you need to go. George studied him for a long moment, and Daniel had the uncomfortable feeling of being evaluated, measured against some invisible standard. Then the older man's face relaxed into a genuine smile. That's mighty generous of you. If you're sure it's not an imposition. No imposition. Beats sitting in a diner in Castroville with half the town gawking at you. The words were out before Daniel could stop them, and he winced. So much for playing it cool and pretending he didn't recognize one of the most famous musicians in the world. But George just laughed. A warm, genuine sound that filled the truck's cab. You recognized me then. Hard not to. My dad played your music constantly. Drove my mom crazy. Daniel put the truck in gear and eased back onto the highway. But I figure you're just a guy who got a flat tire in a storm. That's how I'll treat you, if that's all right. That's more than all right, Daniel. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the truck's headlights cutting through the rain-soaked darkness. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be intensifying. Daniel's windshield wipers were working overtime, and he kept his speed well below the limit, navigating by memory and instinct on roads he'd driven thousands of times. You military? George asked suddenly, nodding toward the small Marine Corps emblem that hung from Daniel's rearview mirror. Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Got out in 2015. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. He wasn't uncomfortable talking about his service, but he'd learned that civilians often didn't know what to say when the subject came up. Thank you for your service. George's tone was sincere, without the awkwardness that often accompanied those words. My son served. Marines. I know a little about what families go through. Daniel glanced over, surprised. I didn't know that. We kept it quiet. He wanted to serve without the attention that comes with being my kid. Did his 4 years, came home safe. I'm grateful every day. They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now. The comfortable quiet of 2 men who'd found an unexpected common ground. Daniel turned onto the dirt road that led to his ranch. The truck bouncing over ruts that the rain was rapidly turning into small streams. The headlights swept across the property as they approached. The main house, a modest single-story ranch-style building that his grandfather had built in 1952. The barn, which desperately needed a new roof. The stables that currently housed only 3 horses instead of the dozen it had been built for. And beyond, the pastures where his remaining cattle grazed, reduced from 200 head to just 47. Daniel pulled up close to the house and killed the engine. Well, here we are. Not much to look at, but it's home. George was already opening his door. Looks like a real working ranch. That's something special these days. They made a run for the covered porch, their boots splashing through puddles that were forming in the uneven ground. Daniel fumbled with his keys, the lock always stuck when the weather was humid, and finally got the door open. He reached inside and flipped on the lights, then stepped aside to let George enter first. The interior was exactly what it appeared to be, the home of a single man who worked too hard and slept too little. The living room was clean but cluttered with the detritus of daily life. Ranch supply catalogs stacked on the coffee table, a pair of work boots kicked off by the door, a jacket draped over the back of the worn leather couch. The walls were decorated with family photos. Daniel's parents on their wedding day, his father standing proudly beside a prize bull, Daniel himself in his army dress uniform, young and confident before the war had etched lines around his eyes. "Bathrooms down the hall on the left if you want to dry off," Daniel said, shrugging out of his soaked jacket. "I'll get some coffee going and find you some dry clothes. You don't have to. You're soaked through. Won't do either of us any good if you catch pneumonia." Daniel was already moving toward the hallway. "I'll leave something on the bathroom counter." 10 minutes later, they were both dressed in dry clothes. Daniel in his usual jeans and flannel shirt, George in a pair of sweatpants, and an old San Antonio Spurs t-shirt that Daniel had dug out of his dresser. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed on the kitchen counter, filling the house with its rich aroma. Outside, the storm continued its assault, rain drumming against the roof and windows rattling in their frames. George had made himself comfortable at the kitchen table, and Daniel noticed him looking at the stack of papers he'd left there this morning. Bills, bank statements, a letter from First National Bank with "Urgent" stamped across the envelope in red ink. Daniel quickly gathered them up and stuffed them in a drawer. "Sorry about the mess. Wasn't expecting company." "Stop apologizing. You opened your home to a stranger. That's a rare thing these days." George accepted the mug of coffee Daniel handed him, wrapping both hands around it and inhaling the steam. "Mind if I use your phone? I should let my people know where I am?" "Sure, of course." Daniel retrieved his cell phone from the counter and handed it over, then busied himself fixing his own coffee. He tried not to listen to George's conversation, but it was impossible not to overhear in the small kitchen. "Hey, Jennifer, it's me." "Yeah, I'm fine. Got a flat tire, phone died, but a good Samaritan stopped to help." No, I'm at his place waiting out the storm. I'll text you the address, but honestly, the roads are pretty bad. Might be better to wait until morning." "Yes, I'm safe. Just had my very own roadside adventure." When George ended the call, he pulled up Daniel's messaging app and sent the location to his manager, then set the phone on the table. "She wanted to send someone out tonight, but I told her I'm fine right here. Hope that's okay." "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Daniel settled into the chair across from him. The kitchen light cast a warm glow over the worn wooden table, creating an island of comfort against the storm's fury outside. Storm like this might last a few more hours. They drank their coffee in silence for a moment, and Daniel found himself relaxing despite the surreal nature of the situation. There was something surprisingly normal about sitting across from George Strait, just two men sharing coffee while a storm raged outside. The icon, the legend, seemed to fade away, leaving just George, a man who was grateful for help and good company. "So, you run this place by yourself?" George asked, his eyes taking in the kitchen's details. The well-used cookware hanging from hooks, the calendar on the wall with notations about cattle vaccinations and feed deliveries, the layer of coffee rings on the counter that spoke of early mornings and long days. "Yeah, it's just me now. My dad passed 6 months ago. Heart attack." Daniel's voice was steady, but his fingers tightened around his mug. "He and my mom ran the place together for 40 years, but she died of cancer when I was overseas. Dad kept it going, but it's been hard. I'm sorry for your loss." George's words were simple, but his expression conveyed genuine empathy. Losing a parent, especially one you're close to, that's one of life's hardest lessons. And running a ranch alone, that's no small feat. It's what he would have wanted. This land's been in the Cooper family since 1948. My grandfather bought it after coming back from World War II. It's not just property, it's legacy, you know? Daniel realized he was opening up more than he normally did with strangers, but something about George's presence made it easy to talk. Maybe it was the shared experience of military families, or maybe it was simply that George was a good listener. I do know. I grew up in Pearsall, not far from here. Small town, ranch country. My dad was in the Army, stationed at Fort Sam Houston for a while. George leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. There's something about this land, this way of life. It gets in your blood. Can't explain it to people who didn't grow up with it. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing naturally from one topic to another. George shared stories about growing up in South Texas, about his own father's work ethic and the values that had shaped him. Daniel found himself talking about Afghanistan, about the buddies he'd lost, about the strange adjustment of coming home to find that everything had changed except the ranch. It was the kind of deep, honest conversation that usually only happened between old friends. Yet here they were, two men who'd been strangers an hour ago, connected by circumstance and a shared understanding of duty, family, and the land that shaped them. Around midnight, the storm finally began to ease. The rain tapered from a deluge to a steady shower, and the wind died down enough that the windows stopped rattling. George glanced at his watch and stood, stretching his back. I should probably get going. I'm sure Jennifer's pulled together a rescue party by now. He smiled, but there was a reluctance in his voice. This has been really nice. Thank you, Daniel. Not just for the help with the tire, but for this. He gestured around the kitchen, encompassing the evening they'd spent. It was my pleasure. Daniel stood as well and meant it. Let me drive you back to your vehicle. Roads should be passable now. That's not necessary. I insist. Besides, I want to make sure that spare tire got you properly settled. They gathered their things, and George changed back into his own clothes, now mostly dry. As they headed toward the door, George paused by the table where Daniel had hastily hidden the bank documents earlier. The drawer hadn't closed all the way, and a corner of that urgent letter was visible. Daniel, George said carefully, I noticed some papers earlier. If you don't mind me asking, is the ranch in trouble? Daniel stiffened, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, he considered brushing it off, making some excuse. But after the evening they'd shared, after the honest conversation about life and loss, it felt wrong to lie. Yeah, he admitted quietly. Medical bills from my dad's illness, couple years of drought, some bad decisions about expanding when I should have been consolidating. I'm about 5 weeks away from foreclosure if I can't come up with enough for a significant payment. But that's my problem to solve. Don't want you to think I helped you tonight looking for something in return. I never thought that for a second. George's voice was firm. But let me help. I can write you a check right now. No. The word came out more sharply than Daniel intended, and he softened his tone. I appreciate the offer, really. But no. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted payment. My dad taught me that we help people because it's who we are, not because of what we might get from it. George studied him for a long moment, and Daniel met his gaze steadily. Finally, the older man nodded slowly. Your father raised you right. That kind of integrity. It's rare, but the offer stands if you change your mind. I won't, but thank you. They drove back through the night, the storm-washed air fresh and clean through the truck's windows. When they reached George's SUV, Daniel checked the spare tire one more time, making sure everything was secure. George stood by, watching quietly, then extended his hand once more. Daniel Cooper, you're one of the good ones. I hope things work out for you and the ranch. Thank you, George. Drive safe. They shook hands, and Daniel climbed back into his truck. As he drove away, he watched in the rearview mirror as George got into his SUV and pulled back onto the highway. The taillights disappeared around a bend, and Daniel was alone again with his thoughts and the long drive home. He didn't know it then, but that evening, that chance encounter on a storm-swept highway was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. The morning after, the storm dawned clear and bright, as if nature was apologizing for the previous night's violence. Daniel was up before sunrise, as always, his body long trained to military hours that ranching had only reinforced. He stood on his porch with a steaming mug of coffee, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. The air smelled of wet earth and possibility, but Daniel's mind was already running through the day's impossible calculations. $43,000. 5 weeks. Two numbers that had become his constant companions, appearing in his thoughts at odd moments, stealing his focus, robbing his sleep. He pulled out his phone and did what he'd been doing every morning for the past 3 months. Opened his banking app and stared at the balance. $3,247. That was everything. His checking account, his meager savings, the emergency fund that hadn't been adequate for the actual emergencies that had befallen him. Even if he didn't spend a single cent on food, fuel, or supplies, even if the ranch somehow ran itself with zero expenses, he'd still be $40,000 short. His phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor, Richard Bennett, who ran a much larger operation about 10 miles down the road. "Morning, Daniel. Heard through the grapevine about your situation. If you want to talk about selling me some of your grazing land, I'm interested. Fair price. Let me know." Daniel deleted the message without responding. Selling off pieces of the ranch would be like cutting off limbs to stay alive. His grandfather had assembled this property over 20 years, adding parcels whenever they became available, creating a sustainable operation that could support a family. Piece by piece, Daniel's father had improved it. Better fencing, a new well, renovated outbuildings. To sell it off in chunks would be to betray everything they'd built. But what choice did he have? He drained his coffee and headed to the barn. The horses, Dakota, Sundance, and Whiskey, greeted him with their usual morning enthusiasm. At least they were paid off, unlike almost everything else on the property. He'd sold most of the horse stock 2 years ago when the drought had forced him to reduce his herd, keeping only these 3 because they were family, practically. Dakota, a 15-year-old quarter-horse mare, had been his father's riding horse. Keeping her was non-negotiable, even if logic said otherwise. As he fed the horses and mucked out their stalls, Daniel's mind kept drifting back to the previous night. George Strait, the actual George Strait, sitting at his kitchen table, drinking coffee, talking about life and family and the weight of legacy. It felt like something from a dream, surreal, and slightly impossible. He'd texted his friend from the Army, Kevin Patterson, at 2 in the morning. "You're never going to believe who I just had coffee with." Kevin had responded this morning, "Elvis, please tell me it was Elvis." Daniel smiled despite himself as he worked. The physical labor was meditative, giving his hands something to do while his brain wrestled with unsolvable problems. George had offered to help, had wanted to write a check right then and there. Daniel had refused on principle. But was that principle going to keep him warm when he was sleeping in his truck because the bank had foreclosed? Was his pride worth more than 3 generations of family history? His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Pride's important, son, but knowing when to accept help isn't weakness. It's wisdom." But this was different. George didn't owe him anything. Stopping to help someone with a flat tire was basic human decency, not something that should be repaid with thousands of dollars. The idea of calling George and asking for money made Daniel's stomach turn. He'd rather lose the ranch than become the kind of person who helped others with ulterior motives. By mid-morning, he was out in the south pasture, checking on his cattle. 47 head, pathetic compared to the 200 his father had run in the ranch's better days. But still mouths to feed, still animals dependent on him. They were good stock, healthy despite the lean times, but the market prices had been terrible for months. Even if he sold every single head tomorrow, which would destroy his breeding program and future income potential, he'd maybe clear $20,000 after paying off the livestock loans. His phone rang, startling him. He didn't recognize the number, but it had a Texas area code. "Hello? Daniel Cooper?" A woman's voice, professional and polished. "My name is Jennifer Wallace. I'm George Strait's manager. He asked me to call and check on you." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, yes, this is Daniel. I'm fine, thank you. I hope George made it where he needed to go safely." "He did, thank you. He was quite impressed with you, wanted to make sure you had my contact information. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call." She rattled off her number, which Daniel hastily scribbled in the notebook he kept in his back pocket. "George mentioned you might be going through a difficult time. He's a man who likes to help people, and he takes loyalty and kindness very seriously." "That's very kind, but I'm managing." The lie tasted bitter. "I was just doing what anyone would do." "That's not quite true, as I'm sure you know. George has been stranded before. Most people either don't stop or they stop and then recognize him and turn into, well, something other than helpful. You treated him with respect and kindness without expecting anything in return. That's rare." They talked for a few more minutes, Jennifer gently probing about his situation while Daniel deflected, unwilling to burden strangers with his problems. After the call ended, he stood in the pasture, staring at his phone. Jennifer Wallace's number was now saved in his contacts, a lifeline he was too stubborn to use. The afternoon brought Bradley Chen, his accountant, who drove out from San Antonio with his laptop and a folder full of documents Daniel didn't want to see. Bradley was young, barely 30, but he'd been doing Daniel's books for 3 years and had become something close to a friend. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel and George had shared coffee less than 12 hours earlier, and Bradley laid out the brutal truth in numbers and graphs. "Okay, here's where we are." Bradley's fingers flew over his keyboard, pulling up spreadsheets. "After the payment you made last week, you've satisfied 3 months of back payments. But you're still 1 month behind. And the balloon payment in January is the big one. $43,000. Even if you sold every asset you have that isn't bolted down, you're still short." "How short?" "Best case scenario? You sell all the cattle at above market prices, which won't happen. You sell the equipment, which you need to run the place. You sell the horses. You'd maybe have $35,000. And then you'd have no income stream, no way to make future payments." Daniel rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 42 years. There has to be something. "There is." Bradley closed his laptop and looked at Daniel directly. "You could sell the ranch. Richard Bennett's been asking about it. I've been doing some back-channel inquiries. He'd pay fair market value, probably $800,000 for the whole property. That would pay off all your debts, leave you with close to $500,000 to start over somewhere else." "Start over." Daniel's voice was flat. "This is my family's land, Bradley. 3 generations. My grandfather built the house I live in with his own hands. My father's buried in the cemetery in town next to my mother. This isn't just property. It's home. I know, man. I'm just trying to give you options." Bradley's expression was sympathetic. "But if you want the hard truth, unless you get a miracle in the next 5 weeks, First National is going to foreclose. And when that happens, the bank will sell it to the highest bidder anyway, probably for less than Bennett would pay. At least this way, you'd walk away with something. After Bradley left, Daniel stood in the kitchen, staring at the walls that held so many memories. There, the height chart where his mother had marked his growth every birthday from age 6 to 18. The door frame his father had accidentally cracked when moving furniture, which they'd never bothered to repair because it had become a family joke. The window over the sink where his mother had stood doing dishes every evening, looking out over the land she loved. How could he sell this? How could he walk away? But how could he stay? That evening, Daniel called Kevin Patterson. Kevin had served with him in Afghanistan, had been there during the worst of it, understood him in ways that most people couldn't. He was living in Houston now, working in construction, making decent money, but they still talked every few weeks. "So you actually met George Strait," Kevin said, after Daniel had recounted the previous night's events. "That's pretty incredible, man." "Yeah." It was surreal. Daniel was sitting on his porch, watching the sun set over his land. He offered to help, financially. "And you said no? Because you're an idiot with principles." "Exactly." Kevin sighed. "Danny, sometimes I want to reach through this phone and shake you. You helped the man. He wants to return the favor. That's not charity. That's how human relationships work. It feels like charity. That's your pride talking. Remember in Kandahar when you were short on cash because you'd sent most of your paycheck home to help your dad with the ranch? Who spotted you $200 for 3 months until you got paid again? You did. But, and did you ever pay me back? Of course I did. First thing when my money came through. Right. And did I ever think of that as charity? Or did I think of it as helping my brother when he needed it?" Kevin's voice was gentle, but firm. "You're in a war right now, Danny. Not the kind with bullets, but still a war. And in war, you don't refuse help from allies because of pride. You accept it, you survive, and when you're back on your feet, you find a way to pay it forward." Daniel sat with those words long after the call ended. The sky had turned from orange to purple to deep blue, stars beginning to emerge like pinpricks in dark fabric. The night was cool, peaceful, beautiful, and it might be one of his last nights sitting on this porch, looking at this view. He pulled out his phone and looked at Jennifer Wallace's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. One call, that's all it would take. One call, one conversation, one request for help. But he couldn't do it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, he opened his laptop and started researching other options. Private loans. Too high interest, and he wouldn't qualify anyway. Crowdfunding, the thought of putting his family's struggles online for strangers to gawk at, made him physically ill. Agricultural grants, none that he qualified for or that would come through in time. By midnight, he'd exhausted every possibility he could think of and was no closer to a solution. He went to bed with his mind churning, falling into a restless sleep where he dreamed of his father standing in the doorway of the barn, shaking his head in disappointment, watching as Daniel loaded boxes into a truck while bulldozers tore down the house in the background. He woke at 3 a.m., covered in sweat. The dream so vivid that he had to get up and walk through the house to prove to himself that it was still standing, still his, still home. In the kitchen, he made coffee he didn't need and sat at the table in the dark, running his fingers over the worn wood. "I don't know what to do, Dad," he whispered to the empty room. "I don't know how to save this place. I don't know how to save what you built." The house was silent, offering no answers. Outside, an owl hooted in the distance, and the wind rustled through the live oaks that surrounded the property. The same sounds his grandfather had heard, the same sounds his father had heard, the same sounds that might soon belong to someone else. Daniel pulled out his phone and looked again at Jennifer Wallace's number. In 5 weeks, if nothing changed, he would lose everything anyway. His pride would be intact, but his home would be gone. Maybe Kevin was right. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness, but he still couldn't make the call. Not yet. Not tonight. 3 weeks passed, and Daniel watched his deadline approach with the inevitability of a coming storm. The calendar on his kitchen wall became a mockery. Each X he drew through another day, feeling like a step closer to the edge of a cliff. 21 days had evaporated into failed attempts at solutions, dead-end phone calls, and the slow, grinding realization that some problems can't be solved through hard work alone. On a cold Wednesday morning in early January, Daniel sat in the waiting room of Briscoe and Hamilton law offices in downtown San Antonio, his best and only suit feeling tight around the shoulders. The suit had last been worn at his father's funeral, and putting it on this morning had felt like a bad omen. Across from him sat Preston Briscoe, a lawyer in his mid-60s who'd been recommended by Bradley Chen as someone who specialized in agricultural bankruptcy and foreclosure defense. "Let me be frank with you, Mr. Cooper." Preston leaned back in his leather chair, his office a shrine to success with its mahogany furniture and walls covered in framed diplomas and certificates. "You have legal options, but none of them result in you keeping the ranch. We could file for bankruptcy protection, which would give you more time, maybe 6 months, but ultimately, you don't have the income stream to sustain the property's debt load. The drought killed your cattle operation, and you don't have collateral for the kind of restructuring that would make the ranch viable." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that your best option is a strategic surrender. We negotiate with First National for a deed in lieu of foreclosure. You voluntarily transfer the property to them, they forgive the remaining debt, and you walk away with your credit relatively intact. Then you could potentially negotiate with someone like Richard Bennett to buy the property from the bank, maybe at a lower price than what you owe. And you could structure a deal to work the land as his employee or a contract rancher. Work my own land as someone else's employee." Daniel's voice was hollow. "That's the best option." Preston's expression was not unkind, but it was businesslike. "That's the realistic option. Mr. Cooper, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen hundreds of family farms and ranches go under. The ones who come out of it best are the ones who face reality head-on instead of clinging to false hope. You're a young man. You have time to rebuild, to start over. But you can't do that if you're drowning in debt and legal battles." The consultation lasted another 20 minutes, but Daniel barely heard the rest of it. He walked out of the office in a daze, the downtown streets bustling with people who had no idea that his world was ending. He drove back to the ranch on autopilot, Preston's words echoing in his mind. Strategic surrender. Face reality. Start over. When he got home, he found Richard Bennett's truck parked in his driveway. The older man was leaning against it, arms crossed, his weathered face neutral but his eyes calculating. Bennett was in his early 60s, a successful rancher who'd expanded his operation significantly over the past decade by buying up struggling properties. He wasn't cruel, but he was a businessman first. "Daniel." Bennett straightened as Daniel's truck pulled up. "Hope you don't mind me dropping by. Been trying to reach you by phone. Been busy." Daniel climbed out, deliberately keeping his body language relaxed, despite the tension thrumming through him. "What can I do for you, Richard? I'll get right to it. I know your situation, and I want to make you an offer." Bennett pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I'm prepared to offer you $750,000 for the entire property. Land, buildings, equipment, livestock. That's fair market value, maybe a bit above. It would clear all your debts and leave you with a significant amount of cash to start fresh somewhere. Daniel took the paper, but didn't look at it. You've been talking to the bank. I've been making inquiries. You missed that January 15th payment. First National's going to foreclose. They'll auction the property, and in an auction, I'll probably get it for $600,000, maybe less. This way, you come out ahead by at least $150,000. And if I could make the payment? Bennett's expression didn't change. Can you? Daniel was silent. Look, son, I'm not trying to kick you when you're down. This is just business. Your grandfather built something good here. Your daddy maintained it. But the economics of small ranching have changed. Consolidation is the only way to survive in this market. You can either accept that and make the best deal you can, or you can fight it and end up with nothing. Bennett gestured to the paper in Daniel's hand. Think about it, but don't think too long. That offer expires on January 10th. After Bennett left, Daniel stood in his driveway, staring at the offer. $750,000. A fortune by some standards, blood money by his. He crumpled the paper and threw it as hard as he could, watching it arc through the air and land in a mud puddle 20 feet away. Inside the house, he poured himself a whiskey. His father's bottle, half empty now, saved for occasions that called for serious thinking or serious forgetting. He sat at the kitchen table and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Kevin's number. I need to take you up on that offer to visit, Daniel said when Kevin answered. I need to get away from here for a day, clear my head. Can I drive up to Houston this weekend? Of course, man. Door's always open. You okay? No. But I will be. I hope. That Saturday, Daniel made the 3-hour drive to Houston, grateful for the chance to escape the ranch and his problems, even temporarily. Kevin lived in a modest apartment in the Heights, had a girlfriend named Amber who was kind and didn't ask uncomfortable questions. And for one evening, Daniel pretended to be a normal person with normal problems. They grilled steaks on Kevin's tiny balcony, drank beer, and didn't talk about the ranch until Amber excused herself to give them privacy. Then Kevin fixed Daniel with the same direct look he'd used in Afghanistan when they'd needed to make hard decisions under fire. Talk to me. What's really going on? Daniel laid it all out. The lawyer's advice, Bennett's offer, the impossible deadline, his complete inability to see a path forward that didn't involve losing everything. Kevin listened without interruption, nursing his beer, his expression thoughtful. You still haven't called George Strait's manager, Kevin said when Daniel finished. No. Why not? Daniel struggled to articulate something that felt obvious to him, but apparently wasn't. Because I can't be that guy. The guy who helps someone expecting something in return. If I call now asking for money, it makes what I did that night transactional. It cheapens it. Or, Kevin said carefully, it makes you human. Danny, you've got this twisted idea that accepting help makes you weak or opportunistic. But you know what I see? I see a guy so terrified of being a burden that he'd rather destroy his life than admit he needs help. That's not strength. That's just another kind of fear. I'm not afraid. Bullshit. Kevin's voice was sharp enough to cut. You're scared. You're scared that if you ask for help, you'll prove all those voices in your head right. The ones that say you're not strong enough, not good enough, that you don't deserve what your grandfather and father built. You're scared that accepting help means admitting failure. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, because they were true. Since his father's death, since the financial problems had started mounting, there'd been a voice in the back of his mind whispering that he was inadequate, that a better man, a stronger man, a smarter man would have found a way to save the ranch, that his failure to keep the family legacy alive meant he wasn't worthy of it in the first place. "My dad never asked for help," Daniel said quietly. "Your dad had your mom. He had a partner, someone to share the load with. And you know what? I bet if you asked around, you'd find out he did ask for help. From neighbors, from friends, from family. That's how ranching communities work. That's how life works." Kevin leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Danny, you're about to lose everything because you're too proud to make a phone call. How is that honorable? How is that respecting what your father built?" That night, Daniel lay awake on Kevin's couch, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with his demons. His phone was on the coffee table, Jennifer Wallace's number just a few taps away. Outside, Houston hummed with life. Cars passing, distant sirens, the sounds of a city that never fully slept. He thought about his grandfather, Thomas Cooper, who'd come back from World War II with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares in his head, who'd worked construction jobs for 3 years to save enough money to buy the first 100 acres. Thomas hadn't been too proud to work for others while building toward his dream. He'd been practical, patient, strategic. He thought about his father, who'd expanded the ranch slowly, carefully, taking calculated risks, but never betting the farm on a single venture. Robert Cooper had been proud, but he'd also been pragmatic. He'd joined the local ranchers' cooperative, had bartered services with neighbors, had been part of a community that helped each other. And he thought about himself, sitting in Kevin's dark living room at 2 a.m., about to lose everything because he couldn't humble himself enough to ask for help from someone who'd explicitly offered it. Maybe Kevin was right. Maybe this wasn't about honor at all. Maybe it was just fear dressed up as principle. Sunday morning, Daniel drove back to the ranch. The 3-hour journey gave him time to think, to really examine his options without emotion clouding his judgment. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he'd made a decision. He walked into the house, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out his phone before he could talk himself out of it. His finger hovered over Jennifer Wallace's number. 3 weeks until the deadline. 3 weeks to either save his family's legacy or watch it disappear. Daniel took a deep breath and pressed call. The phone rang twice before Jennifer's professional voice answered. "Jennifer Wallace speaking." "Ms. Wallace, this is Daniel Cooper. We spoke a few weeks ago after I helped George with his flat tire." "Daniel, of course, I remember. How are you?" Her tone warmed immediately. I'm calling because I need to talk to you about something. George offered to help me when he was here, and I turned him down. But my situation has gotten worse, and The words stuck in his throat, pride and shame fighting for dominance. "Take your time," Jennifer said gently. "I'm about to lose my family's ranch. It's been in the Cooper family for 3 generations, and I've got less than 3 weeks to come up with $43,000, or the bank forecloses. I've tried everything I can think of, and I'm out of options. I don't know if George's offer still stands, or even what he meant by it. But if there's any way he can help, I need to ask. I need to swallow my pride and ask." There was a pause on the other end, long enough that Daniel's heart sank. He'd waited too long. The moment had passed. George had moved on, forgotten about the random encounter on a stormy night. Then Jennifer spoke, and her voice was warm, almost emotional. "Daniel, I'm glad you called. George has actually been asking about you. He wanted to reach out, but didn't want to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. Can you hold for just a moment? I'm going to conference him in." "He's there? Right now?" "He's actually here in my office. We were just going over some schedules. Hold on." There was a click, a moment of silence, and then George Strait's distinctive voice came through the phone. "Daniel? Is that really you?" "Yes, sir. I apologize for bothering you." "Stop right there. You're not bothering me. I've been hoping you'd call." Jennifer told me you're in trouble with the ranch. Daniel found himself telling the whole story. His father's death, the medical bills, the drought, the crushing debt, the deadline, everything. George listened without interrupting, asking the occasional question, but mostly just letting Daniel talk. And as Daniel spoke, something inside him began to loosen. The tight knot of shame and fear that had been choking him for months starting to unravel. When Daniel finished, there was another pause. Then George said, "Here's what I want to do. I'm going to have my business manager reach out to First National Bank. We're going to satisfy your debt. All of it. Consider it paid in full." "George, I can't accept." "Yes, you can. And here's why. Because what you did for me that night reminded me that there are still good people in this world. People who help others without expecting anything in return. That's rare, Daniel. And it's valuable. You gave me something I can't buy. You gave me respect, hospitality, and genuine human kindness. This is me returning that gift. But $43,000 is money. Just money. I've been blessed beyond measure in my life and career. Using some of that blessing to help preserve a family ranch, to help a veteran keep his family's legacy alive. That's not charity, Daniel. That's paying it forward. That's being part of a community." Daniel felt his eyes burning, his throat tight. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep that ranch running. Say you'll continue your family's legacy. And say that if you ever see someone stranded on the side of the road, you'll stop and help them. Just like you did for me." George's voice was firm but kind. "Deal? Deal. And George, thank you. Thank you doesn't seem like enough, but thank you." "You're welcome, son. Jennifer's going to handle all the details. You just focus on running that ranch and making your daddy proud." After the call ended, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, his phone still in his hand, feeling like he'd stepped into an alternate reality. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life. But his phone's call log showed the conversation had lasted 17 minutes, and Jennifer had promised to call back within the hour with details. He walked outside onto his porch, looking at the land that stretched before him. His land, his family's land. Land that would remain in the Cooper family. The January sun was bright and warm, the kind of perfect winter day that South Texas specialized in. Somewhere in the distance, his cattle were grazing, his horses were dozing in their stalls, and his home, his actual home, was still his. Daniel called Kevin, his hands shaking slightly as he dialed. "That was fast," Kevin answered. "You just left a few hours ago." I called Jennifer Wallace. I talked to George. "Kevin, he's paying off the debt. All of it. He's saving the ranch." There was silence. Then Kevin's voice, thick with emotion. "Damn, Danny. I don't even know what to say." He said it's not charity. He said it's paying it forward. That's because it is. You helped him. He helped you. That's how it's supposed to work. I'm proud of you, man. I know how hard it was to make that call. Hardest thing I've done in years. Harder than anything in Afghanistan, in some ways. That's because physical courage is easier than emotional courage. But you found it. You found the strength to be vulnerable, to admit you needed help. Your dad would be proud. After he hung up with Kevin, Daniel spent the rest of the afternoon working on the ranch. But for the first time in months, the work felt different. It wasn't desperate, wasn't tinged with the knowledge that every fence he mended, every animal he tended, might soon belong to someone else. It was his again. Jennifer Wallace called back within 90 minutes, just as she'd promised. Her efficiency was impressive. She'd already been in contact with First National Bank, had set up a payment arrangement, and had Daniel's loan officer, Bradford Hayes, on standby to handle the paperwork. "We're wiring the full amount to satisfy your debt tomorrow morning," Jennifer explained. "The bank has agreed to mark your account as paid in full, and they'll release the lien on the property within 5 business days. You should receive official documentation by the end of the week." Daniel was sitting at his kitchen table, taking notes, even though his hand was shaking slightly. This is really happening. It's really happening. George also wanted me to tell you that his business manager, Frank Delgado, will be reaching out. Not for anything ominous, she added quickly, hearing Daniel's sharp intake of breath. George just wants to make sure you have resources if you need advice on ranch management, financial planning, that sort of thing. Frank's been working with George for 30 years and knows ranching inside and out. That's incredibly generous. George doesn't do things halfway. When he decides to help someone, he really helps them. Jennifer's tone became more personal, less businesslike. "Can I tell you something off the record? In the 22 years I've been working with George, I've seen him help a lot of people, but he was particularly moved by you. He said something about how you reminded him of why he fell in love with Texas in the first place. Good people, strong values, real integrity. You made an impression, Daniel." After the call ended, Daniel sat in his kitchen, overwhelmed by a tsunami of emotions. Relief, yes, but also gratitude so profound it felt physical, like a weight pressing on his chest. And underneath it all, a growing sense of responsibility. George hadn't just saved his ranch. He'd given Daniel a second chance, and Daniel was determined not to waste it. The next morning, Daniel drove into San Antonio to meet with Bradford Hayes at First National Bank. The young loan officer's expression when Daniel walked into his office was priceless. Confusion mixed with barely concealed shock. "Mr. Cooper, we received a rather surprising communication yesterday." Bradford gestured for Daniel to sit. His professional composure slightly rattled. "A wire transfer came through this morning for the full amount of your outstanding debt. $43,217. May I ask what happened?" "I got some help from a friend," Daniel said simply. "Some friend." Bradford pulled up Daniel's account on his computer, his eyes scanning the screen. The transfer came from Strait Enterprises. "As in George Strait?" When Daniel nodded, Bradford let out a low whistle. "How did you manage that?" "I stopped to help someone with a flat tire. Turned out to be the right someone." Bradford shook his head in amazement. "I've been a loan officer for 8 years. I've seen people try everything to save their properties. Second mortgages, family loans, selling off assets piece by piece. I've never seen anything like this. You're a very lucky man, Mr. Cooper." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "Believe me, I know." The paperwork took about an hour. Signatures, account adjustments, title work. When it was done, Bradford handed Daniel a receipt marked "Paid in Full" and stood to shake his hand. "Congratulations. The ranch is yours, free and clear. Well, except for normal property taxes and operational costs, but those are manageable compared to what you were facing." Bradford hesitated, then added, "If you don't mind some advice, don't waste this opportunity. You got a miracle. Make sure you honor it by running that ranch the right way." "I intend to." Over the next few days, Daniel's phone rang constantly. Word had spread somehow, small-town gossip being what it was, that the Cooper Ranch had been saved at the last minute. Richard Bennett called, his voice carefully neutral, to withdraw his offer and congratulate Daniel on finding alternative financing. Bradley Chen, his accountant, called almost in tears, saying he'd been losing sleep over Daniel's situation and was overjoyed at the outcome. But the most meaningful call came from an unexpected source. Father Miguel Santos from St. Anthony's Catholic Church in Castroville, where Daniel's parents were buried. "Daniel, "I heard what happened with your ranch," Father Miguel said. "I wanted to call and tell you something. Your father came to see me about a month before he died. He was worried about you, about whether you'd be able to hold on to the land. He asked me to pray for a miracle." Daniel's throat tightened. He never told me he was that worried. He didn't want to burden you, but he had faith that things would work out. He said, "My son's a good man, and good things happen to good men eventually." I think he was right. That conversation stayed with Daniel for days. His father had known, had been worried, had prayed for exactly what had happened. The thought that Robert Cooper might somehow be aware that his prayers had been answered gave Daniel a strange comfort. A week after his debt was paid, Daniel received a package via FedEx. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery, along with a business card and a small wrapped gift. The letter was from George. "Daniel, I hope this letter finds you well and that the ranch is thriving. Jennifer tells me everything went smoothly with the bank, which is exactly what I wanted to hear. I'm writing to tell you something I didn't mention on the phone. That night we spent talking in your kitchen meant more to me than you might realize. In my line of work, genuine human connection can be rare. People see the image, the celebrity, not the person. You saw me as just a man who needed help, and you treated me with simple human kindness. That's a gift that money can't buy." The enclosed business card is for Frank Delgado, my business manager. He's offered to consult with you on ranch operations, financial planning, whatever you need. There's no charge, no strings attached. Frank's a good man who understands ranching, and he's there if you want him. The other item is something small, a reminder that help can come from unexpected places, and that the kindness we show others ripples outward in ways we can't always predict. Keep being the good man your father raised. The world needs more Daniel Coopers. Your friend, George. Daniel unwrapped the small package to find a leather keychain with a silver medallion. Engraved on one side was the Cooper family ranch brand, his grandfather's original brand design. On the other side, it simply said, "Pay it forward." He sat at his kitchen table, turning the keychain over in his hands, reading George's letter 3 times. Then he called Frank Delgado. Frank turned out to be exactly what George had promised. A wealth of practical knowledge, delivered without condescension. Over several long phone conversations, he helped Daniel analyze his operation, identify inefficiencies, and develop a 5-year plan for sustainable growth. Frank suggested Daniel diversify beyond cattle, perhaps adding a small agritourism component. Weekend ranch stays, hunting leases, educational programs for city kids who'd never seen a working ranch. The days of making it on cattle alone are mostly gone for operations your size, Frank explained during one of their calls. But if you think creatively, there are ways to generate income while preserving the core of what your family built. Daniel implemented the suggestions slowly, carefully. He started with small steps, fixing up the old bunkhouse that hadn't been used in years, researching hunting lease regulations, reaching out to 4-H programs about educational partnerships. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was hopeful work. Work that looked toward a future instead of desperately trying to survive the present. One afternoon in late January, Daniel was mending fence in the north pasture when he saw a vehicle coming up the long driveway. As it got closer, he recognized the distinctive tour bus, and his heart skipped a beat. George Strait was coming to visit. Daniel jogged back to the house, arriving just as George stepped out of the bus, dressed in jeans and a casual shirt, looking more like a regular Texas rancher than a country music icon. "Hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced," George said, extending his hand. "I was passing through the area and wanted to see how you were doing." "Mind? George, you saved my life. You can drop by whenever you want." Daniel shook his hand firmly, genuinely happy to see him. "Come on in. I'll make coffee." They settled at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd sat that stormy night a month ago. And Daniel updated George on everything that had happened. The successful debt payoff, the conversations with Frank, the new plans for the ranch's future. George listened with genuine interest, asking questions about Daniel's cattle operation, his plans for diversification, his thoughts on the challenges facing small ranchers. As they talked, Daniel realized that George wasn't just making polite conversation, he was genuinely interested in the ranching business, in the preservation of rural Texas culture, in the stories of real people living real lives. "I want to show you something," Daniel said, standing and gesturing for George to follow. They walked out to the small family cemetery at the edge of the property, where 4 generations of Coopers were buried. Daniel stopped at his father's grave, the headstone still relatively new, the grass not yet fully grown in. "I wanted to say thank you properly, in front of my dad. He would have wanted to meet you, would have wanted to thank you himself." Daniel's voice was steady, but emotional. "You didn't just save a ranch, George. You saved my father's legacy. You saved my grandfather's dream. You saved everything my family built over 77 years. I don't know how to repay that." George was quiet for a moment, looking at the headstone that read, "Robert James Cooper, 1947-2024. Beloved husband and father, Texas rancher, man of honor. You don't repay it, Daniel. You pay it forward. That keychain I sent you, that's not just a saying. It's a way of life. You helped me without expecting anything. I helped you because I could. Now you help the next person who needs it. That's how we make the world better. One act of kindness at a time, rippling outward." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the January sun warm on their shoulders, the wind rustling through the mesquite trees that dotted the property. Then George spoke again. "My team is organizing a benefit concert in San Antonio in March, raising money for veterans programs and agricultural preservation initiatives. I'd like you to be there, not as a spectator, as a guest of honor. Your story, what you've overcome, it represents what we're trying to support. Would you be willing to share your story? Help us raise awareness about the challenges facing veterans and ranchers?" Daniel was taken aback. "I'm not a public speaker. I'm just a rancher." "That's exactly why your voice matters. People don't want to hear from politicians or celebrities about these issues. They want to hear from someone living it, someone real." George put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Think about it. No pressure. But I think you could make a real difference." After George left, Daniel sat on his porch, thinking about the offer. The idea of speaking in public, sharing his struggles with thousands of strangers, made him deeply uncomfortable. But George was right. If his story could help other veterans, other struggling ranchers, didn't he have an obligation to share it? He called Kevin, who laughed so hard he nearly choked. "Let me get this straight. George Strait wants you to speak at his benefit concert, and you're hesitating? Danny, this is insane. Of course you should do it. I don't know what to say. I'm not good with words. You don't need to be. You just need to be honest. Tell your story. The struggle. The decision to ask for help. The miracle of what happened. That's powerful stuff, man. People need to hear it." Daniel agreed, though the thought of standing on a stage in front of thousands of people made his stomach twist with anxiety. But George had given him so much. The least he could do was help with this. The weeks leading up to the concert were busy ones. Daniel worked with George's team to craft his remarks, though they assured him it didn't need to be polished or rehearsed. "Just speak from the heart," Jennifer Wallace told him. "Tell your truth. That's all anyone wants." He also started implementing Frank Delgado's suggestions for the ranch. The bunkhouse renovation was underway. He'd secured his first hunting lease, a group of doctors from Houston who wanted a weekend deer hunting spot. He'd connected with a local 4-H chapter about hosting summer ranch education days. None of it was making him rich, but it was adding supplemental income, creating a buffer against future droughts or market downturns. And through it all, Daniel found himself thinking about George's words. Pay it forward. One cold February morning, Daniel was driving back from a feed store when he saw a car broken down on the side of the highway. A young woman standing beside it, looking frustrated and cold. Without hesitation, Daniel pulled over. Need some help? The woman, probably mid-20s, wearing scrubs like she worked at a hospital, looked relieved. My car just died. I'm a nurse, and I'm supposed to be at work in 30 minutes. I have no idea what's wrong. Daniel popped her hood and quickly diagnosed the problem. A dead battery. He had jumper cables in his truck, got her car started, and followed her to a gas station to make sure she got there safely. When she tried to pay him for his time, he refused. Just help someone else when they need it, he told her. That's payment enough. As he drove away, he understood what George had meant. The act of helping, of being useful to another person without expectation of reward, filled something inside him that had been empty. It connected him to humanity, to community, to something larger than his own struggles. He was paying it forward, and it felt right. The Majestic Theater in downtown San Antonio was packed to capacity on the night of March 15th. 3,000 seats filled with people who'd paid premium prices for tickets to George Strait's benefit concert. All proceeds going to programs supporting veterans and agricultural preservation. The historic venue, with its ornate architecture and perfect acoustics, hummed with anticipation. Backstage, Daniel Cooper was absolutely terrified. I can't do this, he muttered, pacing in the small green room. He was wearing clothes that Jennifer Wallace's team had selected for him. Nice jeans, a pressed button-down shirt, boots that were new but styled to look worn. He felt like an imposter, a fraud about to stand in front of thousands of people and pretend he had something worth saying. Kevin Patterson, who'd driven down from Houston specifically for this event, grabbed Daniel's shoulders. Look at me. You've faced enemy fire. You've held your father's hand as he died. You've nearly lost everything you love. You can handle 12 minutes on a stage. That's different. Those things happened to me. I didn't have to perform them in front of an audience. You're not performing. You're sharing. There's a difference. Kevin's voice was firm but encouraging. These people aren't here to judge you. They're here because they care about the causes George is supporting. Your story puts a human face on those causes. You're doing something important. A knock on the door interrupted them, and Jennifer Wallace poked her head in. Daniel, we're about 15 minutes from your segment. George wanted to come wish you luck. George entered, dressed in his performance attire, pressed black jeans, a crisp white shirt, his signature cowboy hat. He took one look at Daniel's pale face and smiled knowingly. Stage fright is a beast, isn't it? I've been performing for 40+ years, and I still get nervous sometimes. He pulled up a chair and sat, gesturing for Daniel to do the same. Here's what I want you to remember. These people aren't strangers. They're Texans. They're your neighbors, your community. Half of them probably know someone facing the same struggles you faced. They're not here to judge. They're here to connect. What if I freeze up? What if I can't get the words out? Then you take a breath, look out at the audience, and remember why you're doing this. You're doing it to help other veterans who might be struggling. You're doing it to raise awareness about the challenges facing family ranches. You're doing it to show people that asking for help isn't weakness. It's courage. George stood and put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You've already done the hard part, son. You've lived the story. Now you just have to share it. 20 minutes later, Daniel stood in the wings, listening as George performed to thunderous applause. The man was a master, effortlessly commanding the stage, his voice rich and powerful, even at 72 years old. The crowd hung on every note, every word, their love for him palpable. Then George finished his song and moved to center stage, his demeanor shifting from performer to storyteller. "I want to tell you all about something that happened to me a couple months ago," George began, his voice carrying easily through the theater. "I was driving back from a private event, hit some bad weather, got a flat tire on a lonely stretch of highway outside San Antonio. Phone was dead. Storm was getting worse, and I was starting to think I might be in trouble." The audience was completely silent, listening. Then a truck pulled up. Young man got out, didn't recognize me, or if he did, he didn't care, and spent the next 20 minutes in a downpour changing my tire. Wouldn't accept payment. Took me to his home, gave me coffee and dry clothes. Treated me like a person, not a performer. We spent the evening talking about life, family, service, legacy. George paused, looking out over the crowd. What I didn't know that night was that this young man, a veteran, a third-generation rancher, was about 3 weeks away from losing his family's land to foreclosure. He was drowning in debt, had exhausted every option, and was facing the loss of everything his grandfather and father had built. But when I offered to pay him for his help, he refused, said helping people was just the right thing to do, not something you did for payment. Daniel could see members of the audience nodding, moved by the story. That night reminded me of something I'd forgotten in the chaos of touring and business and all the noise of modern life. It reminded me that there are still good people in this world, people who embody the values that make Texas special: hospitality, integrity, service, without expectation of reward. And I decided right then that if this man ever needed help, I was going to be there for him. George turned toward the wings and extended his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet that young man. Please welcome Daniel Cooper." The applause that erupted was deafening. Daniel forced his legs to move, walking out onto the stage, the lights bright and hot. The sea of faces in the audience suddenly very real. George shook his hand and stepped back, giving Daniel the microphone and the stage. For a moment, Daniel stood frozen, his mouth dry, his heart pounding. Then he saw Kevin in the front row, giving him a thumbs up. He saw Jennifer Wallace standing in the wings, nodding encouragingly. And he thought about his father, about what Robert Cooper would say if he could see his son right now. "Tell them the truth, son. That's all you ever need to do." Daniel took a breath and began to speak. "My name is Daniel Cooper. I'm a veteran, served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army. When I came home, I returned to my family's ranch outside San Antonio, land my grandfather bought in 1948 after serving in World War II. It's not a big operation, not fancy, but it's been home to 3 generations of Coopers." His voice was shaky at first, but it grew stronger as he continued. 6 months after my father died, I found myself drowning in debt. Medical bills, drought, bad decisions, all of it piled up until I was facing foreclosure. I tried everything I could think of to save the place. Sold assets, negotiated with the bank, looked into loans and grants. Nothing worked. And the whole time, I was too proud, too stubborn, to ask for help. He paused, looking out at the audience. Thousands of faces, all focused on him, all listening. The night I helped George, I was coming back from the bank. I'd just been told I had 5 weeks to come up with $43,000 or lose everything. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, ready to just go home and give up. Then I saw someone stranded in a storm, and I stopped because that's what my father taught me to do. We help people. That's who we are. Daniel told them about that evening, about the conversations with George, about the offer of help he'd refused. He told them about the weeks of desperation that followed, about the lawyer who'd advised strategic surrender, about his friend Kevin, who'd challenged his idea that accepting help was weakness. I finally made the call, asked for help, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than anything I faced in combat. Because combat I was trained for. Being vulnerable, admitting I couldn't do it alone, that was terrifying. His voice cracked slightly. But George saved my ranch, paid off the debt, gave me a second chance, asked for nothing in return except that I pay it forward. He pulled out the keychain George had sent him, holding it up so the cameras could capture it. This is my family's brand, engraved on one side. On the other, it says, "Pay it forward." That's become my mission now. Help others the way I was helped. Be the kind of person who stops for strangers, who offers kindness without expectation, who builds community one act of service at a time. Daniel looked directly into the audience, finding his voice, finding his purpose. If you're a veteran struggling with the transition to civilian life, if you're a rancher watching your family's legacy slip away, if you're anyone facing an impossible situation, please learn from my mistake. Don't let pride stop you from asking for help. Don't let shame convince you that you have to face everything alone. We're stronger together. We survive by helping each other. He turned to George, who was watching from the side of the stage, his expression proud. George didn't just save my ranch. He saved my faith in humanity. He reminded me that there are good people in this world, people who use their blessings to lift others up. And he taught me that the greatest gift we can give isn't money or things. It's connection, community, the simple act of seeing each other as human beings worthy of dignity and help. The audience erupted in applause as Daniel stepped back, his part finished. George came forward, pulling Daniel into a hug that felt both paternal and genuine. Then took the microphone. "This is why we're here tonight," George said, his voice carrying over the applause. "To support organizations that help veterans reintegrate into civilian life. To preserve family farms and ranches that are the backbone of our agricultural heritage. To remind ourselves that we're all in this together, that the struggles one of us faces could just as easily be our own struggles tomorrow." The concert continued with more music, more stories, more moments of connection between performer and audience. But for Daniel, the rest of the evening passed in a blur. People came up to him during intermission, sharing their own stories. Veterans who'd struggled, ranchers who'd nearly lost everything, families who'd been saved by unexpected kindness. An older woman, probably in her 70s, grabbed his hand with tears in her eyes. "My son's a veteran. He's been struggling with depression. Won't ask for help. Thinks it makes him weak. I'm going to show him the video of your speech. Thank you for being brave enough to share your story." A middle-aged rancher from West Texas shook Daniel's hand firmly. "Lost our place 3 years ago. Foreclosure. I was too proud to ask for help. Too stubborn to admit I couldn't do it alone. Hearing your story, I wish someone had told me what you just told this audience. Maybe things would have been different." Each conversation reinforced what George had said, that sharing his story mattered, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that one person's honest testimony could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. After the concert, there was a small reception for major donors and sponsors. Daniel found himself surrounded by wealthy Texans who wanted to talk about agricultural preservation, about creating support networks for struggling ranchers, about veteran programs. Several offered to contribute to a fund specifically for helping ranchers facing foreclosure. Inspired, they said, by Daniel's story. George watched from across the room, a satisfied smile on his face, and Daniel understood. This was the paying forward George had talked about. One act of kindness on a stormy night had led to a debt being paid, which had led to a speech, which was leading to resources for others facing similar struggles. The ripple effect in action. Near the end of the evening, Frank Delgado pulled Daniel aside. "I've been talking to some people here tonight. There's serious interest in creating a nonprofit focused on agricultural preservation, buying up struggling family ranches, restructuring their debt, and then selling them back to the families at manageable prices. Sort of a ranch rescue operation. They want to call it the Cooper Ranch Project, named after your family's story. Would you be willing to serve on the advisory board?" Daniel was stunned. "I don't know anything about running a nonprofit." "You don't need to. We'd have professionals handling the operations. But you'd provide perspective, help evaluate applications, use your experience to guide decision-making. You'd be giving other ranchers what George gave you, a second chance." Then yes, absolutely yes. As Daniel drove home that night, his truck's headlights cutting through the darkness on the familiar roads leading to his ranch, he thought about everything that had happened since that stormy night in December. He'd gone from the edge of losing everything to becoming part of something larger than himself. He'd learned that accepting help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. That vulnerability could be strength. That community was built through honest connection. The ranch house lights were on. He'd left them burning. And as he pulled into the driveway, he felt a profound sense of homecoming. This land, these buildings, this legacy, they were his to protect now, his to pass on someday to whatever future the Cooper family might have. He walked to the small family cemetery, standing at his father's grave under a sky brilliant with stars. "We made it, Dad. The ranch is safe, more than safe. It's going to thrive. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure other people get the same second chance I got. George Strait saved our legacy, and I'm going to honor that by helping preserve others' legacies too." The wind rustled through the mesquite trees, and for just a moment, Daniel could almost hear his father's voice. "That's my boy. That's my son. You done good." 3 months later, the Cooper Ranch Project officially launched with initial funding of $2 million from donors inspired by Daniel's story. The first ranch they helped was a small operation outside of Fredericksburg. A fourth-generation family facing foreclosure after the patriarch's death had left his children unable to afford the estate taxes. The project restructured their debt, helped them develop a sustainable business plan, and kept another piece of Texas heritage in family hands. Daniel visited them after the deal was finalized, standing with the family, the widow, her 2 adult children, and 5 grandchildren, as they celebrated keeping their land. The widow, a woman named Patricia Holmes, hugged Daniel with tears streaming down her face. "You saved our home, our family's history. How can we ever thank you?" Daniel pulled out a keychain from his pocket, a replica of the one George had given him, with the Cooper Ranch brand on one side and "Pay It Forward" on the other. He pressed it into Patricia's hand. "You thank me by doing the same for someone else someday. Help someone when they need it. Build community. Be the kindness you want to see in the world. That's how we honor second chances, by giving them to others." That evening, as Daniel drove home under a Texas sunset that painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, his phone rang. It was George. "Saw the news about the Holmes family." "That's what I'm talking about, Daniel. That's the ripple effect. couldn't have done it without you starting the wave. We all play our part. Listen, I'm recording a new album next month, and I want to include a song about this, about that night, about second chances, about paying it forward. I've been working with my writers. Would you mind if we use your story as inspiration? Daniel laughed, shaking his head in amazement at how much his life had changed. George, you can use whatever you want. My story's your story too. Our story. And it's a good one, isn't it? The best kind. The true kind. After the call ended, Daniel kept driving, but his mind was full of gratitude and wonder. 6 months ago, he'd been a man drowning, too proud to grab the lifeline being offered. Now he was part of something beautiful. A network of kindness and support that was growing, spreading, helping preserve not just ranches, but communities, traditions, and the values that made Texas special. He thought about the keychain in Patricia Holmes's hand, about how she'd probably pass one along to someone else someday. He thought about the young nurse he'd helped with her dead battery, who'd probably stopped for someone else stranded on the roadside. He thought about all the ways that one act of kindness, stopping to help a stranger with a flat tire, had rippled outward, creating waves of generosity and connection. That night, sitting on his porch with a cold beer, looking out at land that was secure and thriving, Daniel pulled out his phone and sent a text to George. "Thank you for everything. You didn't just save my ranch, you taught me how to live. Forever grateful." The response came a few minutes later. "You did the hard part. You stopped in the storm. You opened your door. You asked for help when you needed it. That took real courage. Proud to call you my friend." Friend. George Strait considered him a friend. Daniel Cooper, a third-generation rancher from outside San Antonio, was friends with one of the most iconic musicians in American history. It was surreal and wonderful and perfectly ordinary all at once. Because underneath the fame and the fortune, George was just a man who believed in kindness, in community, in paying it forward. And Daniel had become a man who believed the same things. The ranch that had almost been lost was now secure. The legacy 3 generations of Coopers had built would continue. And more than that, Daniel had found his purpose, not just preserving his own family's heritage, but helping others preserve theirs. As he sat under the stars, listening to the sounds of his ranch settling in for the night, Daniel thought about his grandfather, who'd built this place from nothing after surviving a war. He thought about his father, who'd expanded it and improved it despite decades of challenges. And he thought about himself, who'd almost lost it all but had learned something more valuable than land or legacy. He'd learned that we're all connected, that kindness ripples outward in ways we can't predict, and that the greatest gift we can give another person is simply seeing them, helping them, believing in their worth. That stormy night in December, when he'd stopped to help a stranger, Daniel hadn't known he was changing his life. He'd just known it was the right thing to do. And in the end, that was the lesson. Do the right thing, even when it's inconvenient, even when you're tired, even when you get nothing in return. Because sometimes, in ways you never expect, everything comes full circle. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of mesquite and cattle, and the good earth of South Texas. Daniel raised his beer bottle in a silent toast. To his grandfather, to his father, to George Strait, to Kevin Patterson, to everyone who'd been part of his journey. Then he went inside, to the home that was his again, to sleep peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that tomorrow he'd wake up and continue the work of paying it forward, one act of kindness at a time. The Cooper Ranch was safe. The legacy would continue, and the ripples of that one stormy night would spread outward for years to come. touching lives in ways Daniel would never fully know, but could feel in the deepest part of his heart. Sometimes, stopping to help a stranger isn't just the right thing to do. Sometimes, it's the beginning of something extraordinary,